Hello friends, welcome. Friends, today we are going to talk about a very important topic, which is 2G spectrum scam, uncovering the roots. Now friends, why I am doing this video today? The reason I am doing this video is that the implication of this scam is felt by the telecom industry even today. And the repercussion of this scam has been more damaging than the scam itself. And therefore, it is important for the viewers to understand the genesis of the scam, why the scam got created, and what were the implications of this scam on the health of the telecom industry today and how it has damaged the flexibility of the consumer and quality of service of telecom, and also has hampered the India's ability to absorb and unlock full potential of technology. Now, these things might look very strange in the beginning of this presentation, and that is why what I have done is that I'm trying to do a deep dive, and therefore I will do this video in two different phases. This is the first part, which is going to talk about the policy decisions which the government has taken, which resulted in scam, so that we can learn from our mistakes. And the next video that I'm going to do in the next part of this series is going to be the implication of the scam on the health of the telecom industry and how you can salvage the situation if at all it is possible. Okay. So without wasting any time, let's go to the next slide. Friends, what is the perception, the general perception of the public? The 2G scam happened in 2008 because of certain decisions which were taken by the then telecom minister, isn't it? This is the perception. Will you be surprised if I tell you that the 2G scam did not happen in 2008? It actually happened when the telecom sector was privatized, way back in 1990s. That laid the foundation of 2G scam. And this is the whole purpose of this video, to explain to you how the 2G scam foundation was laid in 1995 at the time when the telecom sector was privatized. That information people will not have because most people do not understand. This is a very complex topic. There are so many layers of information which people have to unearth to understand the complexity. Just knowing information in tits and bits will not help us unlock the full insight of the situation. So let's go step by step. I have created 4 slides and I'm not going to go step by step into talking about each and every bullet because the slide is right in front of you. You can go through and read or pause the video and read. What I'm going to talk about here is what is not there in the screen. So let's start with the first point. Why do I say that the scam, the foundation of the scam was laid in 1995 when the telecom sector was liberalized? For that, we have to understand how licenses were issued then. Now, everybody knows that initially when the licenses were issued, it was done in an auctioned manner. It was issued through an auction. Now, the criteria and the type of auctions changed with time. It started with beauty contests, then it became a full-fledged auction. That is not the point. The point is different because you can have different design, auction design, depending upon the conditions in which you are in, because every condition cannot be similar. But the basic problem with the auction design was that it auctioned paper document permissions, right? And the real resources which was attached to the permission, which is spectrum, because without spectrum, licenses in India, as far as mobile services are concerned, is meaningless because you can't really auction a mobile service permission and say that I'm not going to give you any spectrum. What you are going to do with that permission, right? So let's understand this fundamental problem and the fundamental concept of permission. Let's assume for the time being that the permission which is getting auctioned has no spectrum attached to it, or there is no guarantee of any kind of spectrum that you will get after the permission has been granted. Now let me ask you this fundamental question. As a viewer, anybody knows, who doesn't have any understanding of the telecom subject, with little bit of logic in his mind, will be able to understand this concept. What is the value of a permission without any bottleneck resources attached to it? When I say bottleneck resources, I'm talking about resources which has value. For example, spectrum, land, all this kind of stuff, which you can put to your business to unlock value. Because a paper document will definitely not carry any value. So where is the value coming from? If I have to auction a paper document, which is a permission, the value comes from the power of that permission to exclude others. Because that permission is giving you the power to access a market, right? So let's say India has a mobile market, the size of the market is 100, let's assume that. And let's say there are 2 people granted permission to serve that market. So whoever is in business will have an understanding that at best, the market will be split between the 2 players, right? Now let's say that a 3rd player is granted the permission in the next phase of auction. What will happen? Will the players who bid in the first round will be able to visualize that the government is going to come out with a new set of licenses in the next round, and some 2 or 3 new players are going to get entered into the sector? So his ability to access 50% of the market is going to shrink now. Let's say 2 more players are entered into the market, and same paper document is again auctioned in the next, let's say after 2 years. So now you have got 4 players in the market. 4 players are going to access how much now? Instead of 50%, 2 players, now 25%, right? Do you agree with me? So what happens, to the players who participated in the first round of the auction? They paid through their nose for the permission to do what? Exclude others, because they had no clue that the government is going to come up with the next round of auction, because it was not spelled out at the time that, the government is going to just auction services for license for services only in this phase, and will no way come out with any kind of auction in the next round in another couple of years or 4 years, right? So an auction which is only giving away permission is a very faulty design, because the value of that license will diminish with new players entering the market, because there are no bottleneck resources attached to it. This is a very, very fundamental, this is the most important issue that people have to understand, because without this understanding, you will not know what kind of mistakes that we committed in the beginning when we started giving mobile licenses for telecom services. The second mistake which we committed was that we auctioned licenses, but we gave spectrum, which is bottleneck resources, attached to those licenses administratively. We never auctioned spectrum. So what happened was that the discretion of the government was on 2 fronts. One was changing the condition of the license, because whenever there was an auction, one line would have been written very clearly stating that the government has full power to change the conditions of the license based on its discretion. Even though the permission has been granted, that line will be written there. Okay. The second is that the allocation criteria for spectrum is not getting auctioned. It is at the mercy of the government. The operators are actually at the mercy of the government to give spectrum in whatever form and whatever rule that they decide, because that is given through administrative allocation. So this notion that India had a policy of auctioning licenses from the very beginning is wrong. India never had a policy of auctioning licenses. Actually, they were auctioning licenses, but that auction didn't carry any meaning without the bottleneck resources which are attached to the license, and those bottleneck resources were given through an administrative mechanism. So we were always following an administrative mechanism of granting spectrum And that was done through a, by the way, first come, first serve, right? It was the first come, first serve policy was from the very beginning, even though we had auction. Why? Because within those licensees who were given the permissions, only those who met a certain criteria were given spectrum first, and I'll come back to that, right? I'll come to that, during the presentation, and you'll understand how that impacted the overall policy dimensions of the country and how it led to 2G scam. So that's the second point. The third point is that because I told you that the government had full flexibility to change the condition of the licenses, whether they can want to give this license through auction or administratively. So what they decided in between is that they changed the criteria for giving licenses for basic services. Means initially they gave the basic services licenses through auction. Later they started giving the basic services license through an administrative mechanism. Cellular licenses were anyway given through an auction. Even in 2001 it was given. But basic services were given through a administrative mechanism. Therefore, the value of these two licenses, the basic services and the cellular licenses, were different. Cellular licenses were valued higher because it was given through auction. The basic services licenses were of lower value because it was given through an administrative mechanism, right? But the problem does not stop here. The problem actually aggravates further. As you know, that the cellular licenses had to have spectrum, because without spectrum the cellular license have no meaning, because you really cannot deploy a cellular service without spectrum. So naturally you need to have spectrum, and the government had a criteria for assignment of spectrum, which I am going to come and explain to you as we go through this presentation. However, for basic services license you don't need spectrum, because what you are doing is you are laying out copper cables to offer services, right? You have a switch, then you lay out copper cable, and that copper cable will go and run to your house, and then you have a fixed line phone that you carry, and then you call like this, okay? So there was no need of spectrum. Now what happened was, after the basic services licenses were granted, the basic service of players went to the government, lobbied the government and said that, look, we are finding it difficult to roll out services because laying out copper cable is a very, very difficult task, because digging is a very difficult task. Therefore, in order for us to unlock the full potential of this license, it is important for us that we should also be given spectrum, right? So that's how this whole controversy started, because that was the foundation of the controversy. So the basic services licensees also got spectrum, and that spectrum was granted to give the last mile access only from the switch to the home, not to do anything more than that. And they were not allowed to do full mobility, because the cellular people are saying that you have given us license, a service which is having the full capability to roll out anywhere in India, and the consumer to roam between services, not only within the service area, between service area, as if that there is no different number was required. There was no need to have a different number. Let's say if I am in Delhi and I move to Mumbai, using the same number, I could make calls to any part of the world or anywhere in India as you do today. But the basic services licenses were regulatory. There was a regulatory, diktat to the or a constraint. The basic services license were granted or kind of forced, so that they could not have, there was no, just a minute, give me a minute, 1 minute, these people, this scam, this spam calls, basically I should have, from next time onwards, I would, yeah, so I'm back now. So what basically I was trying to say is that the basic services license were also granted spectrum, and that spectrum was done with an intent that they could also offer wireless service. They could roll out the service faster, right? And they could unlock the full potential of the license. Here is the problem. The problem is that the technology which the basic services licensees were using was fully capable of doing full mobility, similar to what the cellular licenses were capable of. Now, because of that, there was a direct tussle between the basic services license and the cellular license. Now, how this logjam was prevented, how this conflict was prevented? This conflict was prevented by the regulator, and the regulator said that, look, we will restrict the basic services license from a technology, because they had full potential from a technology point of view, they could have done full mobility, but from a regulatory point of view, they will be forced from a regulatory point of view not to, they will not be allowed to do full mobility. That's the problem, because their technology potential, their technology capabilities will be constrained through a regulatory diktat. So that's what the regulator did. Now, since the technology has other ways of circumventing regulatory diktat, we know that if technology has a potential, then it is very easy to circumvent this. So what happened was, the WLL, so-called basic services license with wireless spectrum attached to it, they were able to circumvent this whole regulatory constraint and was able to replicate similar services which the cellular service providers were providing. So they were in direct conflict with the cellular service provider. And I don't want to get into how they did that. It's a separate topic of discussion because this video is going to go very, very long otherwise. But they did that. So what happened was, this actually created a conflict, right? So let me go and explain to you that, let me go to the next slide so that you can read the bullets here. So, how flawed auction design framework resulted in will controversy. So this is the slide, right? So what happened was that since they were capable of doing the same services which the cellular service providers were capable of, resulted in a direct conflict with them, and the matter went to court. And the court, the decision was made that, look, we, in the interest of the consumer, we cannot sustain this controversy, and therefore the government should come out with a migration package. And in the migration package, it was decided that the basic services operator who paid less, right, as I told you earlier, they paid less, will pay the difference between what the cellular license provider paid at the time when the fourth auction happened in 2001, plus a penalty. And that led to the new regime, called universal license regime, announcement by the government. Government announced a new universal license regime where entry of new players were allowed through a difference, through a fees, which was decided at the time of 2001 auction. Now, can you see the problem with this? As I explained to you earlier, that initially the permissions were auctioned. There was no guarantee that what quantum of spectrum would be attached to those permissions. The quantum varied, and I'll explain to you how the quantum varied. So the permission was a paper document to exclude others. Now somebody has jumped into the same compartment of cellular service providers through this universal service license, the new announcement of universal license, where the first time the first come first serve policy was formalized on license also, because earlier licenses were auctioned. Now licenses will be granted through a policy of first come first serve, because the WLL people who actually participated in the WLL auction, they never participated in the cellular auction, right? So they actually happened to get into because of the controversy in the territory of the cellular operators without participating in the auction. And there was a rule which was decided at the time to get out of this controversy, is that they will pay the difference plus a penalty. So this laid the foundation for future operators' entry into the cellular space. Now those players who paid initially and bid in the auction, they look like idiots, right? Because they paid for the permission. They never paid for the spectrum, right? Because it was not a spectrum auction. It was a license auction, right? Now can you make out the fundamental problem with our auction strategy, right? And how it led to a first come first serve policy of even licenses, which was earlier not there. Earlier only spectrum was given through first come first serve. Licenses were never granted through first come first serve. But it led to a first come first serve policy of license that actually laid the foundation of of what? The 2G scam, right? This is what happened. How the bill controversy laid the foundation of 2G scam, which I have already explained, and you can go through it the bullet points separately. Now let me give you more information. Now actually what happened? Why 2G scam happened, right? Now 2G scam happened because, let's go to this particular last chart because we are already past 20 minutes, so I'll just quickly close. How this the first come first serve policy was changed, resulting in 2G scam. Now I've told you that the foundation of first come first serve policy was laid in 2003 when the universal license policies were announced because of the WL controversy. Now, the first come first serve policy was not laid out in paper explicitly. The rules of the game were not defined, right? So there was an understanding by the operators that, look, we are in the game, nobody will be allowed to enter. And let me explain why. Why nobody could have entered the sector at that particular point of time when the universal license policy was announced. Universal license was announced. The reason was that the subscribers criteria, which I didn't talk about, which was the criteria for assignment of spectrum to the licenses which was granted through auction and through first come first serve basis, was structured in such a way that there was no spectrum available to be given to any new players. Now you might not understand this. Let me explain. Initially what happened was the government really didn't have much spectrum to be given. So they came out with this criteria of subscriber base. I told you that spectrum was never granted through an auction basis. It was granted through a first come first serve basis. How was the queue decided? Who will get spectrum first? It was decided by a criteria called subscribers. The government said that, let's say an operator A has got a certain amount of subscriber, then he is going to be eligible for a certain quantum of spectrum. As soon as his quantum increases to this level, he will be granted a next tranche of spectrum, right? So whoever meet those milestones, he will be keeping on granting spectrum. So they had decided a criteria till 15 megahertz for GSM spectrum, means there will be various milestones. Let's say some numbers were there, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 10 million. So as your subscriber count increases, you in a particular service area will keep on granting spectrum up to 15 megahertz. And for CDMA, it was up to 7.5 megahertz because CDMA was a more efficient technology. That's a different topic of debate. I will come out with a different video to explain what kind of problems that got created. Don't want to discuss this here. Now, because there was a criteria which was already fixed based on efficiency of technology, the mobile operators were assured that today they have got 8 megahertz of spectrum, maybe 10 megahertz, but tomorrow they will get 215 megahertz. Now, if everybody, there were 4 or 5 players at that time operating, if all the 5 players got 15 megahertz each, right, there was no way a new player can enter the market. Do you understand why the first come first serve policy never resulted in that kind of hue and cry at the time when telecom minister made certain changes, which I'm going to talk about right now. There was no way new player could have entered the market because all the spectrum was reserved for the existing player based on subscribers criteria. Then what happened was TRI came into picture, and this slide is pretty important. And there was a lot of cacophony and discussion in the public domain that the mobile sector is quite concentrated and it is monopolized. But the foundation of monopoly was laid by the government. Because when you are going to auction permissions, you actually laid the foundation of monopoly. Let me ask you a fundamental question. The government came out with privatization of telecom sector. Why? Because they were finding it difficult to invest in the telecom sector. There was a huge queue of 10 years for getting a telephone connection. Now, in a situation like this, where queue is such a large, why do you want to restrict anybody who wants to participate in enabling, by trying to basically, unlock the full potential of the sector and invest in the sector to expand the telephone connectivity in the country? Why you want to restrict that? You should basically invite all players and say that, please come and please invest. I am going to give you a free license. But for spectrum, you have to bid, because there is no way for me to create a queue for spectrum, because if the demand is more than supply, I can't make a distinction between who to give spectrum and who not to give in a transparent fashion. Because restricting players participating in the sector by artificially raising the barrier is a wrong policy, because there was need for investment. People should be allowed to invest. Why are you basically blocking them? So foundationally that was wrong. But because of the subscriber-based criteria, the monopoly was completely entrenched into the sector, because there was no way other people could have entered. Now suddenly the government decides, oh, telecom sector has got monopolized, and I need to do something to basically demonopolize it. So what happened was TRAI revised the subscriber-based criteria. In the 2007 recommendation, TRAI said that, look, no longer 15 megahertz of spectrum is going to be granted to you based on these criteria. If you want to get 15 megahertz of spectrum, an operator, a cellular operator, you have to meet 5 times the criteria. 5 times, mind you. Let's say if 2 million subscribers gave you 10 megahertz, or let's take an example, 5 megahertz of spectrum. Now, in order for you to get the 5 megahertz of spectrum, you need to have now 10 million subscribers. Now, therefore, what happened was, suddenly the claim of the operator to 15 megahertz spectrum suddenly shrunk, and it became very, very small. So what happened was, more and more spectrum became available now, which was not there earlier, because there was no way for any player to enter the market because spectrum was not available. Now, with one stroke of pen, with TRAI said that, subscriber-based criteria is now 5 times. Why? Because efficiency of GSM technology has increased. That was a faulty argument. Even if GSM technology efficiency increases, you don't expect the telecom players to make dynamic investment in the GSM technology let me ask you this question. iPhone, you buy iPhone? How many people buy iPhone every year? I'm not talking about those people, who are extremely rich, right? I'm talking about middle class. Maybe in 4 years, right? Because you don't expect to buy iPhone or your phone every year. So do you expect a player to make changes in this network, whatever he has already deployed, just because the technology has become efficient, right? It doesn't make any sense. I do not understand how the regulator behave, in our country. I do not know what kind of policies people come out with. So they came out with this arbitrary policy, right? Then what happened was, the TRAI now advised the administrative allocation of 2G licenses only. Like TRAI gave a recommendation saying that, look, we do understand that the spectrum should be auctioned because we are a forward-looking regulator. We would like all future service license to be auctioned, for example, 3G license or any kind of 4G license, everything should. But we would not allow the 2G licenses to be auctioned because it will disturb the level playing condition. That was the argument which TRAI gave. Now let me ask you this fundamental question. Let's say if you go and buy land or property for your business, and that is one of the input in your business. And let's say if another player entered the market after 2 years, 3 years, will he be able to gather the same land at the same price, right? The price of the land will keep on fluctuating. So are you giving to the telecom sector, apart from spectrum, any other aspect of business? For example, land, for example, power, everything, I don't know. There will be many ingredients that goes into the business at the same price to maintain level playing field. Are you able to ensure that? So if you can't ensure that, why spectrum, right? So TRAI came out with that, 2G licenses cannot be auctioned, only 3G can be auctioned. Then, okay, even if you did that, you didn't even revise the fees. You basically make your recommendation so vague that the 2001 auction discover prices for licenses could be attached to the licenses which were given in 2008. Because if you had so much concern about the level playing condition, then you would have done something to at least do some inflation adjustment on the amount that was paid in 2001. You did not even do that. So who laid the foundation of the scam? Let me ask you this question. It was actually much before actually the scam was laid much before than what it happened because of the actions of people who did much before the scam. So now it was given to the telecom minister in platter, right? You have laid the foundation of the scam by making all this kind of recommendation. You reduce the subscriber, you enhance the subscribers criteria, made more spectrum available. Then what you did was you recommended no auction of 2G spectrum. Third, you basically ensured that there is no way to adjust the fees. So then telecom minister said, oh, very good, everything is with me. So what he did was, because also the subscribers criteria and the first come first serve policy was not clearly defined, announced in the public domain. DOT kept it into the chest, and they really didn't want to make any changes in their ability to they really didn't want to give away their flexibility to make changes in the license in the policy, so-called subscriber first come first serve policy. They did not make it hard and fast and announced it very clearly out in the public domain. So what telecom minister did, he actually used his discretions now, because he was empowered and loaded with discretions. So he said that, first of all, the first discretion that he chose was that, look, telecom sector in this country need more competitiveness. In order to ensure that the prices of services comes down, the license has to be made cheap. So he attached the 2001 auction prices to the 2008 licenses. The first thing that he did. Second is that he changed the whole concept of of the license, the first come first serve criteria, by making the license payment for license fee as the order to be, as the attribute, as the metric to decide the sequence in the queue. Now there was no criteria which was clearly defined. He says, okay, whoever pays first will be in the queue. And then what he did was he arbitrarily changed the cutoff date. And let me explain this in a little bit more clearly so that you understand. So what happened was, as I told you, there was no flurry of licenses before these changes were made, which I told you, because there was no spectrum, right? Once the spectrum was announced and the intent of the government was announced that they are going to give licenses, everybody flocked in. Players flocked in because everybody saw that the license is given at a subsidy. So if I tell you that, there is a sale going on in some market, will you not jump in? It will become a chaos there, Everybody will be in the queue to grab a pie of that subsidy. So there was a queue. Now, you have only limited quantum of spectrum, because license without spectrum does not make anything. So you had only limited quantum of spectrum. Spectrum is not, unlimited. So what you did was, you saw people were in the queue. So in order to prevent too many people applying and paying for license, and you have no ability to pay for spectrum, you had no other choice but to decide on a cutoff date which was against your own published cutoff date, because that's how you could have restricted the queue. There was no other way you could have restricted the queue. So you decided on a cutoff date which was before that what you have announced earlier, and then you gave everybody licenses at 2001 prices. And because getting a license is not just standing in a queue and get the license. Let's understand how you can get license. First, you have made an application. You have to first submit an application. Your application will be scrutinized by DOT official. And then they will say, oh, by the way, your application doesn't have any problem. You are fit to make the payment. So there is a queue for making an application. There is a separate queue for making the payment. There is a third queue for getting the spectrum. All these three queues are independent in nature. Every queue has got their own first come first serve policy. It is not just, I applied first, therefore I should be granted spectrum first, irrespective of the fact that DOT comes to me in 10 times to make changes in my applications. You understand? If that was the case, it would have been much better. But you had got three different queues. Now imagine the kind of discretion that the government had. Let's say if I make an application and somebody is standing behind me, he also makes an application, and the DOT guy, the official decides arbitrarily and say that, look, your application does not have this, you go behind and then come back. and that guy basically, who actually came much behind me, he gets through, and he basically now gets through the other line of making the payment. How discriminatory it would be. Can you imagine this? So this is what happened, right? Because there was too much discretion which the government held close to their chest, and this is a problem with our system from the very beginning. It is not a problem of this time. This is a problem which is happening from the very beginning. We are not, comfortable enough to make transparent policies well before the public. And if you are making a change in the policy, that should also be put transparently before the public, right? In order to create transparency. Now, if you don't create transparency in the system, you will get into a situation like this. So just to summarize of the situation, the 2G scam did not happen by the decisions which were taken and by Telecom Minister, then Telecom Minister. It happened much before that, what I explained to you. And the agencies which were responsible to contain the scam, especially the TRAI, right, inadvertently played a very important role in empowering DOT to carry out the scam. Because of this very much, I do not understand how a regulator who is considered to be an expert regulator will take these kind of decisions which are completely illogical, right? And you empower the government to basically do, if TRAI had taken the right decision and said that, look, this is no way 2G spectrum should be granted through an administrative mechanism, it should be auctioned. There was no way anybody could have carried out this scam, right? So anyway, I think we have got 36 minutes because I really wanted to make this point very clear to you, because this is not understood. There are too many layers of information you have to navigate, and I have gone through these information very clearly and very, very meticulously from the very beginning. I've been following this sector. There are a lot of other complexity which I have not spoken about. I just wanted to make this as simple as possible to the viewers so that they can understand 2G scam did not happen by just one telecom minister making the decision. It happened much earlier because of the government urge to create more flexibility within itself to take decision and make change decision based on their discretion, right? And come out with a faulty policy of auction, which should not have been. Nowhere in the world, auctions or permissions are done. They are always, auctions are only for bottleneck resources like spectrum, that too with an intent not to make money. To intend to come out with this is the only transparent mechanism to auction resources where demand is much more than supply. There is no other way you can, assign resources where demand is much more than supply. And whenever people participate in auction and pay upfront payment for that auction, then they actually are conscious enough of the fact that they have to use those resources efficiently and optimally, right? Otherwise, non-serious players are going to get hold of those resources and they are going to create an havoc, and they are going to squat on the resources and not going to roll out services. So anyway, friends, I am going to stop here, and I am already 48 minutes in this video, and I hope that you have liked this video, and I'll come back to you in the next phase of this video next time. Thank you very much.